I want to start off today's sermon a little different, with an apology and a reminder. A reminder that we are situated right smack in the middle of the Christian Lenten season, the 40 days that Jesus spent wandering in the desert, tempted by the devil, and an apology for the 24 months that you've spent wandering and wallowing in a pandemic-plagued desert. An apology for the cotton coverings that have camouflaged your smiles. Yes, I'm sorry for the insanity incited by forced isolation. Or, depending on your living situation, the insanity you've experienced upon having your normal times of intentional isolation interrupted by stay. Probably had to start taking these 2 years. Yep, I'm sorry for the pain that has plagued you over the course of what many may deem a 2-year-long living hell, or Hades, as our fiery friend may say. And if you stay awake throughout the whole sermon, you may find out just how accurate an assessment that really is in regard to our isolation situation. So why am I so sorry? Well, you see, 2 years ago I did something that might have made God a little bit mad, or at least taunted him to flip her middle finger in an I'll show you kind of way. I should have known better. After all, the 40-year exodus that parallels the 40-day Lenten season starts off with the plaguing of the Egyptian pyramidtropolis. But hey, in looking at the Jewish Passover narrative, at least I left locusts and firstborn children out of things. Yeah, I should have known better than to suggest fasting from faith as an alternate idea for Lent. That's 6 weeks separating Ash Wednesday from Easter Sunday. Yeah, I should have known better, but I did it anyway. It started off innocently enough. I was putting the final touches on a rather unconventional sermon series that I had dreamed up for all of you called Atheism for Lent, an exploration of prescribed spiritual barrenness to parallel the desert's physical barrenness. And I needed a good metaphor to depict our embarking into the unknown. That's when I got an email from our Unitarian Universalist buddy, Ben Sandell. Hey Ryan, listen, I can't make it this weekend, it said. What? What did he mean he couldn't make it? I panicked. He was my scapegoat when my atheistic escapades went awry, my safety net. Heck, he was the one that encouraged me to stir things up at the fellowship. So I continued reading. Yeah, you see, I'm stuck in forced quarantine in China because of some stupid virus. You see, Ben had taken his family on an unfortunately timed vacation in celebration of the Chinese New Year and was now trapped inside an Airbnb on the other side of the world. The government is forcing you to quarantine? Talk about your absurd excuses. At least nothing that crazy can happen in the USA, I thought, in a display of ignorance that I would give anything to have back. However, regardless of the absurdity of the email, his story provided a perfect illusion for my atheistic Lenten sermon. What if our call to the wilderness was not a faith-filled frolic through the desert in the footsteps of Jesus, but a deep dive inward via 40 days of forced social and spiritual isolation? What if we approached one of the most holy seasons as an opportunity to explore the wilderness of our own thoughts and fears from an atheistic vantage point? So, as some of you may remember, that is exactly what I preached in March of 2020. This season, I called out from the pulpit in a playful prose. I challenge you to step into a spiritual desert, to forget everything that you have been taught about faith for 40 days and sit instead in silent captivity, to enter into a time of self-imposed quarantine, left alone to wrestle with your doubts and confront your most adversarial emotions. A time void of any social or celestial support or distraction, just you and your thoughts. Yes, I proclaimed, I challenge you to quarantine with your own craziness for 40 days and see what temptations and tribulations arise. Well, of course I was joking. After all, we live in a free country, and pandemics, they're a thing of the past. We have good medicine, good hospitals, and an occasionally good government nowadays. Heck, even if someone were to take my call to quarantine seriously, 40 days of social and spiritual isolation was, well, a pretty extreme ask. In hindsight, maybe I should have suggested, I don't know, an afternoon. Little did I know that on that faithful Sunday morning, In the weeks to follow my ironic sermon allusion, the world would indeed enter the desert, and for a whole lot longer than 40 days. Though, hopefully not as long as the 40-year Exodus. You see, in our fast-paced world where technology is more viral than a virus, the season of Lent is a time to pause and explore our true identity, to discern who we were before the world told us who to be. It is a time to return to the basics, to empty ourselves, to fast from what doesn't sustain, so that we might fill our lives with the things that do. And all this fasting, be it literal, social, or spiritual, makes us hungry. Thus, what an opportunity we have as we come out of this time of forced social fasting to assess what it is we truly crave. I love the utter simplicity of the Gospel of Luke in summarizing Jesus' satanic skirmish. Yeshua resided in the wilderness for 40 days, it writes, tempted by the devil and ate nothing. And, at the end, he was hungry. Yeah, there it is, hungry. I think our souls and stomachs are all growling for something these days. And regardless of what your faith tradition is, I hope this hunger is something that you allow yourself to feel in the weeks leading up to the Easter celebration. Not something that you superficially fill with the temptations of the world or flee from in fear. And maybe the best way to face our fears instead of flee from them would be to meet the fallen angel so often associated with them. In such, there is someone whom, as sung in the Rolling Stones chart topper Sympathy for the Devil, would like to introduce himself. Care to guess his name? The Hebrew word Satan simply means adversary. And it occurs several times throughout the Hebrew Bible in reference to the enemies of both human and celestial variety. Typically, the word is accompanied by the definite article, ha, which makes it less a name than it is a job description. Ha, Satan, or the Satan, simply means, thus, the adversary. And given the abundance of adversarial interactions we have with people, places, thoughts, and things every single day, who of which the ha references, is wide open for interpretation. I remember the first time I heard the title of that Rolling Stones song some years ago, Symphony for the Devil. I didn't know the Stones were Satanists, I thought, while listening to their happy-sounding hellish harmony. But when I eventually learned that the song was actually called Sympathy for the Devil, my point of view changed a little. There's a big difference between writing a symphony for the devil and feeling sympathy towards Satan. One would write a symphony to honor a higher power, whereas we feel sympathy for things that we are, sorry for. And when reflecting on the various accounts of the adversary throughout and beyond the Bible, I have come to admit I feel a little sorry for the spandex-clad kook. And I am not the first. You see, in the Middle Ages, Satan was seen as a laughingstock, an annoyance to God. The Satan would often be depicted in theatrical plays as the comedic fool, who was not only clumsy but ugly in appearance and character. Historian Jeffrey Russell described this early interpretation of Satan by saying he was more pathetic and repulsive than terrifying. Moreover, our adversary was not in the most merry of company. For in 1409, John Wycliffe composed a list of 6 fallen angels who joined him, each of whom had fallen from heaven for evil sins following a battle against Michael. Beelzebub, due to envy; Lucifer, of wrath; Abaddon, for sloth; Mammon, for grief; Belagor, for gluttony; Asmodeus, for lust, and all of humanity's most ugliest sides. And although each sin was labeled with its own fallen angel, they all united to form what we know as the Satan, whose main sin was pride. So who wouldn't pity this pitchfork-bearing protagonist of the world, who we have deemed its enemy? Sympathy, and maybe even a little love. How's that for irony? The Christian pastor on the Unitarian Universalist staff is telling us to love Satan on Lenten Sunday. But hey, as I've said before, despite my Presbyterian affiliation, I wake up agnostic, if not flat-out atheist, several days a week. And after all, wasn't it Jesus himself who insisted we love our enemies? Why, you ask? Because our greatest adversary, or enemy, is far too often ourselves. And those who show hatred towards others most often first hate themselves. I don't know about y'all, But what I discovered while living in isolation with my own thoughts these past 2 years was that it was my own thoughts that were the most adversarial. You're not good enough. You're not productive enough. You're lonely. You're lazy. You lack purpose. You lack faith. My list of lacks seemed about as long as the 24 months that I sat stewing over them. I am my own worst enemy. I am my adversary. But I am also the solution. I can love the lack out of myself and of the world. So what if we could overcome our overly critical adversarial inner voices? What if we could love our ugly side? What if we could ex-nay that Satan from ourselves? Well, we can. And it starts with humility, whereas Satan's fall started with pride. And in opposition to the dry desert of the devil, as today's reading by Rumi reassures, humility lives in, well, humidity. The water. The water is a beautiful heavenly humbler. And as someone who has perfected the fine art of the wipeout upon moving to Surf City, USA, can deem, I must agree with Rumi. God is most pleased when we return to our oceanic existence, when we wipe out, when we get wet, when we dive in. Poseidon, Allah, Krishna, or any other epithet used to depict the utmost energy of the universe has humbled us by causing us to hunger these past years, socially, literally, and spiritually. 2 years in the desert. We have all we've gotten a little prideful and complacent in the years leading up, much like the Israelites of Exodus, and we were forced into a time of, well, unpleasant fasting. You see, the Hebrew book of Deuteronomy recounts that Exodus experiencing, emphasizing the clothes of the Israelites did not wear out and their feet did not swell during those 40 years spent wandering in the desert. And neither have our spirits during these past 2. You see, it continues, the Lord brings us into a good land, a land with brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out in the valleys and hills. Yep, you heard right. As sunburnt as our souls may seem, it's time to return to the sea. You see, last Sunday, Rev Russ defined the earth as a school of forgiveness. But for as land-loverish as you may be, a nice wipeout is essential on occasion to keep us humble, to wake us up, and remind us that our problems, our anxieties, and our adversaries are merely droplets in an ocean. And that, as Rumi wrote in another poem, The Garden Paradise, we are not mere droplets in an ocean, but we are each an ocean in a droplet. Yeah, returning to the water is about being one. It's about reconnecting to our kindred souls, our spirits. You see, God is pleased, writes Rumi, when our love realizes it is part of something oceanic. Yeah, and it begins to move with the whole. Your water wants to reach the sea, and if you could shake loose your foot, the earth would become completely dry and the ocean water completely free. But desserts and undiluted wine soak you back. Wanting wealth, power, and more tasty food have made you drunk and dry. These are the superficial hungers and thirsts. But Rumi continues, when you can't have what you want, you get headaches. That hungover disappointment is proof that what made you drunk was desire. And who wouldn't agree that the best cure for a hangover is a cold plunge in the Pacific Ocean? Yeah, when we lose ourselves to the desires of the world, we dry up. It doesn't mean don't desire. It doesn't mean don't want. Yeah, we should always want. Want is our soul speaking out for purpose, for passion. But don't lose yourself to the superficial hungers. Don't lose yourself in that desert. But remember that the desert is the opportunity to feel the hunger, to feel that dryness, that aridness, and really assess, where do I want to go? And that's where we're all being called as we move forward. Now that we're humbled, we're being called to a new land as a fellowship. Where are we going to turn? Where are we going to grow individually and communally? Yeah, because we have each other. We are an ocean in a drop. So my fellow droplets, I urge you to spend some time in hunger this week and this month, and regardless of your faith tradition, leading up to the Easter celebration. And just figure it out where it is you are being called out of the wilderness to hydrate the world around you. And maybe wipe out on occasion. So, my friends, it's been a beauty joining you this morning, and I bid you well this week to wipe out and wander in your merry ways in the wilderness. Amen.